transparency to enhance our measurement capabilities of digital media, but just as importantly, to put us on a level playing field with non-digital media to facilitate cross-platform comparison, mostly for brand marketers. There are 5 pillars of making measurement make sense. We're here to talk about one of them, but so everybody knows what's coming down the pike, the 5 pillars are viewability and eGRP, ad classifications, brand performance metrics. Imagine standard brand performance metrics for interaction and engagement. That's number 4. And number 5 is brand attitudinal tracking. Again, imagine in the future a world where we have consistent ways to measure those things. The panel obviously is about viewability. The status of that is as follows. A key component of 3MS was not only to establish potential standards, to get cross-ecosystem adoption of these standards, but to turn the process over to an independent governance panel. So the viewability aspect of this has been turned over to the MRC. The MRC is now in the middle of determining specific viewability guidelines, which they're on track to publish either at the end of this quarter or early in first quarter of 2013. And I didn't answer your question. They're currently working with a definition of viewability as at least 50% viewable in the in-view window for 1 second or more. It's important to note that that's a working definition. They have not published the final guidelines yet, and so we're just working with that, Jonah, until we see the final definition.
Right, so there's a working definition and no standard. It's not been announced as a finalized thing, and it's been handed off to the MRC. So to ask, I guess, an obvious question, one follow-up on that is, can you be certified to do viewability if there's no finalized definition?
So the MRC is a fantastic organization that everybody in this room, I think, knows well. And what they do is accredit and certify people that they're doing what they say they are setting out to do. And so nobody can be certified for a viewability standard today that is reflects the work of 3MS, because the viewability standard has not been finally defined.
Okay, so but we're hearing a lot about it, right? It's in market. You represent GroupM, and you're perhaps one of the largest media buyers now in the U.S. So how is viewability affecting you, and does the definition matter that it's not standardized? Are you guys seeing it in the market today?
I mean, well, we're active on all fronts to get to a head on this. Obviously, it's very difficult to argue that buying ads or running ads for advertisers that are never viewed or have a true value. I'd like to hear that pitch, actually, if someone's got that. So
I think you've heard it many times.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, but I haven't heard a good one yet. From our front, we'll continue to lead the way. I mean, from a GroupM perspective, we are the largest spender of media in the world. So making sure that we're getting everything we have for our clients. I mean, we want to get the best pricing, we want to get the best performance, we want to give them competitive advantage. So we're not just waiting around for folks to tell us what's right or wrong. We're helping actively to lead the way.
So if you're leading that, are you requiring in 2013 that the publishers in this room guarantee viewability of their inventory?
Yeah, I think, from our perspective, our point of view on it is that we're not quite technologically there yet. You and I actually talk about it a bunch. There is stuff that is still not trackable or measured, and we need to get to a head on it. And I think right now, when you get studies back that show that you were 50% in view, that's great, or not great, but that's it's something is actionable. But yet you hear that 50 or 40% of the inventory wasn't measured in the first place. So it's not a true accurate number. It's a very scary number for a lot of advertisers or agencies for that perspective, but it's not a true number. And we got to get to a head, get a real number out there so we can start actioning against it.
So it's a good question, actually. So before we get to Sue and Jim, you see a lot of inventory, you see a lot of data. What is the benchmark for viewability? How should people in this room be thinking about viewability numbers when they see it on their specific site?
How should they be thinking?
Yeah, what's the benchmark for viewability today?
Well, if you are serving a lot of ads that are never viewed, you should probably change that. That's just my words of wisdom. One of the things that we've been arguing as digital folks for a very long time, and I've been selling against up until very recent, is the amount of reach and frequency that we have in our business. And what we're going to get to is we're going to get to a head on it. I mean, 50 billion ads a day. There's only 220 million unique users in the U.S. alone, and maybe 100 million of them are active on any given day. So you're talking about frequency levels that are just realistically, no offense, but absurd. So we'll get to a head on it, and if a lot of them happen to be not viewed in the first place, then it's a great thing for digital. We should be very excited about getting to a head on it.
So Sue, what do you think about that? You run digital research at Viacom. Is this a great thing for digital? You guys sell TV as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tough thing for digital. I think that all of the measurement that's new and has been emerging in the last couple of years, finally, is something for us that's challenging and that we have to overcome, but it's the ground floor of doing business. We don't want to be serving impressions that are not viewable. We want to be serving impressions that are seen, and then it's somebody else's fault if the creative is bad. I'm kidding. We love them. But I really do think that it's not even skin in the game. It is the foundation of the house.
Jim, what do you think about that? What's AOL's perspective on viewable impressions?
Well, I mean, I think it's hard for any publisher to ignore it and retreat from it. And I think it's the responsibility of us in the industry to embrace it. I mean, I think from the benefit of digital has always been its measurability. And if there's something that will help ads that we serve perform better, I think we need to embrace that. I think what my hope is that viewability allows brand dollars to be more comfortable moving online as we look for new standards and look beyond the click. And oftentimes a brand advertising, brand creative is not really conducive to click. And if there's something, whether it be an interaction rate, a hover rate, some other metric that makes brands comfortable in moving dollars from whether it be print or broadcast or outdoor into the digital world, I think we're active and interested in participating in that discussion.
So Sue, on that point of bringing dollars from broadcast into digital, Viacom sells both.
Yes.
Right? You sell up front. So how do you think about, how does viewability come into that discussion, if at all? Or how does, I guess broadly speaking, how does measurement or effectiveness come into the discussion in Viacom selling broadcast as well as digital? Well,
I think you've got two completely different platforms, and we do sell cross-platform. We sell it as often as we possibly can. And the idea of moving that television content via video onto our digital platforms and selling it that way so that somebody could have a very integrated and cohesive and multi-platform experience is great. But the measurement is far from there. And so we're looking at TV metrics. We're kind of taking a step backward, to your point when we were talking earlier, in talking just about reach. We're talking about viewability, for God's sake, something that we thought was going to be a no-brainer back in 1995, and it's finally here, right? And then there's so much more beyond this. So I can't wait until we get to a point where we've got it figured out, you've got it figured out, and we can just take it to the next level and talk about brands.
So that's an important addition. When the MRC publishes the viewability guidelines, it will include display and digital video.
And the trick on digital video, of course, is the ad starts. I'm not very worried there because our ads don't start automatically.
Yeah, can you clarify that actually for the audience?
So when you load a page and you've got a video that just begins, right? That's going to be an issue. If you have an ad or if you have a video that you have to click on to start, to play, then that's an automatic, you're able to automatically see that stream.
So is that, Peter, what's the working definition for viewability with regards to video, and while we're on the topic of other things besides display, mobile as well?
So for digital video, it has not been disclosed by the MRC, so I don't know it. In display, the working group for 3MS came up with a working definition, which was then adopted, but this is the MRC and a group of many publishers and agencies. So actually, it's not published, and so I can't say what it is there. Those are the two that are being digital media forms that are being tackled today. Certainly, mobile is important. It's next on the list, but it's not currently in the timeline. So we probably won't see for 2013 viewable guidelines for mobile, but it's coming.
So what is the timeline on viewable impressions? So we keep reading about it, we keep hearing that something's happening in 2013. Is there, when's the MRC announcing these finalized standards, and on GroupM, when are the biggest media buyers starting to require that impressions be viewable by contract?
So what we see, so the timeline has right now that the viewability guidelines will be published in the fourth quarter or the first quarter. The MRC, together with many agencies and publishers, did a large-scale pilot. We're about to see the results of that. Clearly, there's more work to be done on the definition, especially around the IAB Rising Stars units. And so that work will be done, again, by the MRC with its working group. And it just depends on how quickly that process can unfold. But the timeline has the viewable guideline the end of this quarter or the first quarter of next year. In addition, the 3MS group, which represents much everybody in the ecosystem, also agreed that there would be parallel reporting on viewable impressions and the existing programs at least until the third quarter of 2013. There's so many things to work through during that period that is going to be incredibly messy. Let's hope that we can continue doing business on the metrics that we have now, fold in, add in the viewable as a parallel path to understand the implications while everybody gets their systems up to fine-tune them and get better numbers. And the timeline envisions that by the third quarter of 2013, the industry will have its act together enough to potentially shift over entirely.
So yeah, what are the barriers holding us back? I mean, all right, maybe I'll pass this to you. What's this, every time we read an article, somebody mentions iframes. What's this thing about iframes?
You're asking me about?
I'm asking you about iframes. I'm only allowed to ask questions, not answer them.
Well, I mean, the basics is that, we can't, right now as an industry, you can't track whatever the numbers are, 35, 40% of ads that are shown up. The biggest culprits of where you can't track, not culprits being bad, culprits being where you can't track, are networks and exchanges for the most part. It's a hurdle that companies have to get over, have to get past. And there's a lot of different initiatives over, especially through the IAB, regarding safe frames, regarding not just the standards, but ways that we can evolve digital as a whole. Stuff to bring offline dollars online. That's where we're at. So regarding iframes, we just have to get to a point of we have to be able to measure where things run, why they run, and if a user saw it or not.
So on the question of safe frames, since you mentioned it, Peter, safe frames refers to an IAB process or initiative to try to solve this fundamental issue that seems to be a barrier, right? If ads are served into quote unquote unfriendly or nested iframes, they can't be measured today, whether they're viewable or not. So how can we move to a standard as a currency with that holding us back, and what's the IAB doing about it? So
the IAB Safe Frame Initiative, ta-da, has solved for this by developing essentially an API that allows for the communication into an iframe and out of an iframe with the page to do what's necessary specifically to assess viewability. The specs for that will be released at the IAB Ad Up Summit on November 5th. There'll be a 30-day open comment period, and we expect that those will be published at the turn of the year. So you can see, Jonah, why it's going to be a very busy first quarter, because we'll be getting viewability guidelines at the same time that an API, which is probably not as easy as I think it is to implement, is released, and everyone will be doing those things at the same time. That's why this parallel reporting is so important for a period of time.
So Q1 or sometime early 2013, iframe issue gets solved, and we all start buying and moving to a viewable impression standard. Is that the answer to all of our problems? Does that solve everything, Jim?
No, I mean, I think, viewability is one measure of performance of a campaign. I think it sometimes gets overstated that at the end of the day, the job of a publisher working with a marketer is to, move boxes off shelves or get more signups. And the viewability of an ad is certainly a contributor to that, but I think at the end of the day, it's still about the performance. It's about the service that you're getting as a partner. It's about the audiences that you're bringing to the table. I mean, I think one thing that viewability doesn't speak to specifically is about the quality of audience. But it is very important. I know what we've been doing for quite some time is an overall audit of all AOL owned and operated sites, and are ads above the fold, and what percentage are above the fold, and if it's a 300 by 1050, is the proper percentage above the fold. We grade every site every week on page load time, and we're constantly monitoring the performance of our sites on behalf of the marketer. So, I think this is a trend that will absolutely continue, but I also don't want to overstate that the entire world is going to change because there's new viewability measurement, and I think it's still up to every media buyer to stack, rank, and priority order. What is the actual grade I'm going to give to that partner based on the performance of the campaign or mid-campaign?
So what about the so-called eGRP that Peter mentioned, Sue, you mentioned as well? Is this a real thing? Is this happening? Are you getting demand from people saying, I want to buy digital on a GRP basis?
Sure. I mean, we get as much as we get demand, we get asked for help. It is in that, hey, can you help us make the transition between traditional brand metrics to digital metrics, and how can I get an apples to apples comparison so that I won't get fired if I move this money, is essentially what it comes down to. So I think there's a lack of standards right now in terms of the
with regards to GRP you're talking about.
Yeah. And then on the same thing on viewability. I mean, I think it's all, what's the common currency that everybody agrees to? Quite one of the reasons why television has been so successful, right or wrong. I mean, Nielsen has been the common currency for decades, and everybody's agreed to it, and everybody's able to buy and evaluate off of it. Certainly, ComScore has been that for the digital side, but when you begin to split hairs and go really dig into the numbers and go beyond just reach, I think that's where that's the next step that everybody collectively needs to agree to.
All right, would you agree with that? Is GRP the next step?
Yeah, it's here. It's now. So that's I believe it's good news. Very good news. From a TV perspective, what the amount of money that being spent across is decimal points, but for digital folks, it's actually quite impressive, eye-opening. But yeah, apples to apples is a must. We were talking about it a little earlier. As a digital, 15-year digital vet, I kind of look at it and say it's backwards. We're taking a step backwards, but from what we know in digital, from an accountability perspective, from a real-time perspective. However, the money dictates that they need to understand what everything is worth, and they understand very well what a spot is worth, what an audience is worth at a specific time, date, etc., with specific creatives and call to action. So, while we look at it and say we have a lot of accountability in our medium, they have a lot of money and they have a lot of understanding of what it drives. So we have to get in rhythm with them. And when we do, it's unbelievable evolution for digital right here, right now.
But isn't
so too much? I think we have too much accountability and not enough comparability, and that's what these fundamental basics of viewed versus served, and GRP will enable the comparability period.
So
Yeah.
GRP and viewability speak to whether the ad was there and who it was exposed to and how many times, right? Does it speak to ad effectiveness? You talk about TV being effective.
Yep.
How does that work in digital?
Well, we're already knee deep. I mean, we have, we do a little research at GroupM across the board, and WPP as a whole, in case anyone didn't know. We're already looking at attribution as a whole. I mean, it's a favorite topic of mine, and it's certainly flawed as it relates to digital today with all our great metrics. So we're looking at already what viewability means to overall success of a campaign, regardless of the goals and objectives, in addition to thousands of other variables. So we're not at a loss for data. We all know that. It's just a question of what you're going to do with it. So we were talking a second ago about TV flowing in. That's here. That's now. It's beautiful. But as it relates to viewability and then overall success of a campaign, we're looking at it every second of every day across a lot of campaigns and a lot of money, and to find that correlation. So right now we can use it directionally, right? 50% of 50% of 30%, et cetera, with whatever browser you use. I mean, it makes it more complicated, but we're getting to a head on it, and that's the next fight, is to get beyond everything being viewable. That's where the metric will be. That's what we'll be paid upon. Where we're going to go from there is what's next. What other metrics can we use to educate traditional folks and/or what we're doing in digital today?
So Jim, you talked about audience. So how is audience being measured today? Are there standards for demographics? How do you know who's actually?
I think
if the ad's viewable, how do you know who saw it?
Well, that's the point, right? I think there's got to be audience composition is huge in that there's a particular buy targeted at a age demographic, and to be able to deliver within that is vital. And I think again, back to viewability being only one of many measures, it's still about burden on all publishers to create compelling content that attracts valuable audiences. And if you focus on that and focus on providing valuable audiences, everything else falls into play. And redesigning iframes is actually the easy part, to make sure that the ads load on time and are above the fold. Really, that's just that's probably an afternoon. I think getting
I'll tell the ad ops guys.
Yeah.
The sales guys think you can do this.
If it requires retagging of every exchange and network with every publisher, no, it's not that easy.
Well, not that.
But
No. I'm saying on when I'm talking to a site owner, and I'm saying, look, we're being held to these viewability standards, and you need to make sure the ad is above the fold. And they say, well, actually, we want a 56-point headline, and therefore it's going to push the ad below the fold. I mean, that's the perspective that I'm bringing. Certainly in your world on the agency side, not the case. But again, it is still back to compelling audiences that are engaged audiences that are going to do more than, hey, just what the ad loads, but did they interact with it? Did they hover over the ad? We know that we can't heat map every user to see, did they look at the headline? Did they look at the offer within the ad? But there is the ability to track interaction, to track hover rates, and we launched an ad format 2 years ago called Project Devil, which was really an ad designed not to be clicked through. It was the idea was to keep the user within the ad, let them interact with a slideshow or a store locator within a map, scroll through different units within the unit. And so, this is something that we've been at for a couple of years. And again, that's when we go back out, it's less about, hey, the ad loaded on time and it was above the fold and therefore check the viewability box. It's, hey, we had a 10x better than average interaction rate on this particular ad, and therefore it's worth a premium for that.
Yeah, it's a good point. So it brings us back to maybe, Peter, something you can touch on with the rising stars, which is viewability is telling us the ad is there, but isn't this ultimately about user experience and how they engage with the content or the ads on the page?
Absolutely, and it's something that in a conference like this we rarely touch upon, but we all know that the biggest driver of campaign success is the ad creative. So that's 60% of the effectiveness, and now we're talking about the other 40%. And so within that 40%, one of the, I would say, since I'm talking my own book here, best strategies to beat the viewability challenge is to adopt the IAB Rising Stars, which are naturally larger, more interactive canvases meant to be interacted with on a page. And Devil has been adopted by the industry in the IAB as one of these.
Yep.
And within that, we have established at the IAB 2 additional metrics for interaction: universal interaction rate and universal interaction time, which we envision being tracked for any ad, any display ad, machine read across any site. And so it's sometimes in 2013, we'll begin to see, of course, impressions, clicks, but we'll see in-view percentage, average in-view time, universal interaction rate, and universal interaction time. And all of a sudden, you have a very different conversation with your marketers and their agencies.
All right, how do you think about metrics? You talk about sort of measuring this for every client. Is there a one-size-fits-all for brand clients, or is it everyone's going to be different?
No, everyone has goals and objectives. I mean, the very simplest, the baseline is audience, clearly. I mean, big brands have spent a lot of time and effort to understand their audiences well beyond, what we deal with in a brief today or an RFP today. I mean, these brands have extensive knowledge, especially the largest of brands, extensive knowledge down to, days of the week and what color socks they like to wear. I mean, it's impressive, very impressive, eye-opening. And so from that perspective, the baseline is reaching the right audience, but then it's to accomplish a goal and objective. And I can say it here, and I can say it from, again, my history is that our understanding of key performance indicators in digital are not where they need to be yet. They're lacking. So it's, for a better word, they're lacking. So understanding what we can do in digital is first, and then execution against it. So there are a lot of crazy goals I hear. Click rates, interaction rates.
Hover, that's the good one.
Hover
percent.
time, X amount of time above the fold or in view. I mean, all those things are pieces of a much bigger puzzle, which is either sell product or to bring a user down a funnel or across a funnel, depending how you look at it. All those things. I mean, there's thousands. So by no means is it give me performance metric A.
And I can't remember the last time I got an RFP across our desk that said, I want to reach women 25 to 54.
Period. Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
I mean, it's.
Except in television.
You're saying they're more, the
If
RFPs
Sorry,
Sorry,
broadcast.
Yeah. If viewability is the foundation, then that's the living room. We kind of need to get into the kitchen, and we need to be able to use data management platforms to be able to target people with a particular sentiment, proclivity, whatever the case may be, and move way beyond the demo conversation.
Let's stay on that for a second, actually. So there's a lot of folks in the market that say they have that data and that you can target by these things. Are you seeing that as accurate? Is it working? Are brands happy with it?
We're measuring it all the time. It's not perfect, and you're talking about the difference between cookies and people when you're doing measurement, and it gets all kind of sticky, and you want to sell by household instead of by people, and it's not easy, and it is still being figured out, and I think we're a long way from figuring it out, unfortunately, but I do think that those people, and GroupM is in constant conversations with us about this kind of thing, they're ready to test, they're ready to, and are just working with publishers who are also ready and willing and able to put skin in the game.
Is there going to be, so Jim, you mentioned before that Nielsen is the default standard in TV. GroupM has a big partnership with Nielsen on cross-media measurement. Is there going to be a single standard for ratings or GRP online? I think Google may have one too.
Well, I think that depends who you ask.
How about you?
I don't know the answer to that question. Will there be one standard? I believe that in order, clients that flock and or trust a source that spend a lot of money in television will most likely flock and utilize a tool that can bring them the full suite across all things advertising. And that's a very safe bet.
And Ari, I'm sure you've got clients, they come to you, every client has a different set of KPIs that they come to you with, right? So I think there's always going to be a diversity of metrics that I think people are measuring themselves against. And you know, if you could look at ad category by ad category, you know, CPG is going to be drastically different than travel in terms of how they're going to measure the success of their campaign. What are the KPIs that they're going to want to see reported on? So I think, you know, one of the things is just one of the way in which we think about this is understanding what's the currency within the category, and really trying to learn, you know, how does a major CPG brand advertiser look at their business different than a finance advertiser? And you know, it's incumbent upon us as a sales organization to really know their business. Like, you know, how does Pepsi get end caps at a Walmart, and can we help them do that? You know, is that will move soda for them, and so, you know, the way that you do that is you've got to spend time with them, and it's not just sitting with the media team. It's, you know, understanding all of the services that the agency's providing, all of the research that they're doing, collaborating with agencies and other third parties to make sense of all the data, and then also spending time with the marketer in understanding their world.
So it's a good point, though. Is this an issue? I guess the question is the lack of uniformity in success metrics, right? They're different by category, in your point, or in your point, maybe even by brand, versus in, let's say, the direct response world, where it's pretty uniform. You can fire a pixel on a landing page, something happens, you either submitted the email, you either signed up for a trial, or you didn't, right? So is that holding brand dollars back?
Well, I mean, I think that's the way in which digital advertising has been viewed up until this point. It's, you know, through the mind of a click-through rate or some sort of, what was my effective cost per action, whatever that action might be. And I think that really, when you come down to it, it's like, you know, how do brands that are not inherently going to attract a click or attract some sort of digital interaction, how can they feel good about being in a digital environment? I think, by the way, I think digital video and the proliferation of, and just the amount of digital views that are taking place, and, you know, the hockey stick growth of that is going to change that dramatically. Now that's a very comfortable environment, in many cases using an ad format that they're comfortable with, whether it's a 15 or a 30-second pre-roll. Now we're speaking that media language within digital. That's very traditional by nature. But back to, you know, how is it that, you know, it's still, at the end of the day, brands being comfortable in the environment and with a currency that everybody's agreed to, and it's still, don't get me fired. I'll do this, but don't get me fired. So you better have the data.
Okay. So I think we have a couple minutes left, and I thought maybe we'd take questions. I know Vivek Shah is out there somewhere, and he told me he had a question. So Vivek, where are you?
He bailed on us.
He bailed. He left.
We answered it.
All right, no question from Vivek. Any questions? This is head media buyer in the U.S. who spends all the money on your sites. You want to ask him anything?
You don't want to do that.
No questions about viewability iframes? No? Yeah, we got one.
Hi, my name is John Sasso. The question is, once you get to the viewability, assuming we have a world where you're measuring viewability, publishers are going to want to have as many ads viewable as possible. So where do you stand on clutter? At what point do you have too much? Do you want there to be a 1-to-1 ratio between page views and ad units seen across the internet?
I mean, I would say, you know, clutter is not a good user experience, and you will not have audiences. You know, I think that, you know, we talked about a host-initiated video. There are not a lot of users that like a page to load in a video wall to overtake the page and blast them. And, you know, we're very conscious of that, and it's something that, you know, the sales team is always going to wrestle with the edit team in pushing the boundaries, but at the end of the day, there's that fine balance between what's an acceptable level of ad units to content. And you know, one of the things that the objective of Project Devil was how can we make the ad beautiful, the format beautiful, so that there's really a blurring of the lines between content and the ad, with the expectation that it's a better user experience and that's a more engaged user that's more likely to be a repeat visitor to that site. So,
Agreed.
On that front, goals and objectives, reach and frequency. I mean, you know, besides rate today in digital, reach and frequency is the most commonly the second best optimization tactic of a campaign.
Yeah.
So clutter will be solved, or is solved clearly by how many ads per user per campaign you're serving against. And that's just it. It's pure math.
One of the little known aspects of the Making Measurement Makes Sense initiative, which will also go into play in 2013, I didn't mention it because I didn't want to add to the growing nervousness and confusion, is an ad classification taxonomy, in which every ad comes with signals about its size, where it is on the page, how many other ads there are on the page, whether it has rich media, whether it has video. And so in that environment, you cannot hide if you are somebody who's jamming your first page full of
it won't perform. I mean, it's still at the end of the day, it's just not going to perform a
To
full
your
above
point,
the,
you're not going to have audience.
you're not going to have audience, you're not going to have high performance, and over time that flushes itself out.
So, but outside of clutter though, what about, there's a major newspaper that just did a redesign, and they're now freezing an ad on the right side of the page, and the content scrolls down. So what about that? Can you just freeze the ad and
I mean, I
does that
think,
solve
you
it?
know, I'm
great.
sure they're testing it to
It's
see
great.
whether or not that is accepted by the user. You know, that's a tactic within mobile that we know. It's and I think, you know, there's always going to be analysis based on what does that do to the user base, what does it do to the experience. So TBD for sure.
Yeah.
A lot of TBD.
Yeah.
Certainly applaud the experimentation, because that's what we need to change, period. And this is a good impetus to do so.
There's a question in the back.
Back.
I'll just try to be loud. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Bluman made a comment, ultimately it's funneling people to an experience, a purchase or some other event. What is the standards bodies looking at in terms of creating that funnel and shortening that? And ultimately, we're buying digital vapor, you know, impressions on an imaginary 50% of a 50% user. How quickly are we going to have these ads drive to actual transactions? So when do these lines bleed into actual commerce rather than the trading on the second of a bit of an ad impression? Any thoughts on that?
Mr. Bluman?
Yeah, Mister,
Maybe
that's
hand
scary.
on
Yeah. Wow. So, you know, I might have heard the question wrong, but I'd take a wild stab that Unilever, for instance, understands the purchase funnel and will do a lot, and has done and continues to do a lot of things to change the timelines from top to bottom. I don't think that necessarily we're going to solve that for them. We might help them execute against it, but they're pretty, you know, they understand. I mean, realistically, you can't have babies quicker, you can't utilize diapers more often necessarily, so whatever the product is, you know, they understand that. That's you know, real digital can help facilitate pieces of the funnel, but not from top to bottom in a quicker way. I don't see that as a reality.
But that's the physicality of a good. What about a digital good? You don't think that's...
Well, I mean, well, a lot of people in this room make a living on that and have for a while. You know, obviously selling, whether it be leads or product or pencils or whatever it may be, and doing it all day, every day. You know, realistically, if we were to look at the number of ads that are served between midnight and 6 a.m. in any given region, there's a big chunk of ads where in the TV side, you're not touching that from a brand perspective, right? You're only touching it from a DR perspective. So, you know, we're going to continue to do what we attribute as successful in digital. But when we really get to a head, I think we're going to understand that what we've been attributing to success hasn't necessarily been what's driven the success.
I think that's going to be the last word. I'm getting the sign that we're out of time. So thank you, everyone, and thank you to the panelists.